Hello, everyone. I know many of you are listening to this while preparing for sleep. Before we begin, take a moment to notice where you are and what time it is for you right now. You don't need to type anything if you're already drifting off. And if you enjoy calm stories like this, you can gently support the channel by liking and subscribing. Whenever you feel comfortable, now, let the rain fade into the background and allow the story to unfold slowly. Maple Crescent was the kind of street real estate agents loved to photograph. Neatly trimmed hedges, identical mailboxes, and porch lights that flicked on at dusk like a choreographed performance. People waved when they passed. Children rode bicycles in slow circles. Nothing ever seemed to happen there, and that was exactly why no one noticed when something terrible began to unfold. It started with a sound most people ignored. A neighbor later told police she had heard a sharp argument late one night, muffled through closed windows. She assumed it was a television. Another thought it was a couple disagreeing, nothing unusual. On Maple Crescent, people believed privacy was a form of politeness. You didn't ask questions. You didn't interfere. 3 weeks later, a woman named Laura Bennett didn't show up for work. Laura was dependable. She worked at a small accounting office downtown and never missed a day without calling. When she failed to answer her phone, her manager contacted her sister. By evening, police were doing a welfare check at her home, a modest beige house near the end of the street. The front door was locked, the lights were off. Everything looked normal, too normal. Inside, officers found Laura's purse on the kitchen counter. Her phone was charging beside it. Her shoes were lined up neatly near the door. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken furniture, no blood. It looked like someone had simply stepped out for a moment and never returned. At first, investigators treated it as a missing person case. Adults were allowed to disappear. Maybe she needed space. Maybe she left voluntarily. But as days turned into weeks, that explanation began to crumble. Laura had withdrawn no money. Her car remained in the driveway. Her bank accounts were untouched. She had left behind her passport, her laptop, even her coat. Despite the cold nights, someone hadn't just taken her, someone had planned it. Detectives canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on every door. Most residents said the same thing. They hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. Maple Crescent was quiet, always had been. Then one neighbor hesitated. He lived 2 houses down and mentioned something odd. A delivery van that had been parked overnight several times that month. White, no logo. Always late at night, always gone by morning. No one had questioned it because service vehicles were common in the area. Traffic cameras confirmed the van had entered the street multiple times, but its plates were obscured. The case stalled again, until a maintenance worker made a discovery months later. Behind Laura's house was a narrow drainage path lined with trees. While clearing debris, the worker noticed disturbed soil near the fence line. Police were called. Forensic teams arrived. What they uncovered confirmed what investigators had feared from the beginning. Laura had not left on her own. The discovery shook the neighborhood. News vans lined the street. Residents who once waved politely now avoided eye contact. Fear replaced routine. Attention turned inward. Detectives began re-interviewing everyone. Slowly, carefully. Patterns emerged. One neighbor stood out, a quiet man named Daniel Rowe, who lived directly across from Laura. He worked night shifts. He kept to himself. He was polite, forgettable, and always home. To home. Cell phone data placed his phone near Laura's house on nights he claimed to be at work. A partial shoe impression near the burial site matched a rare brand he owned. Then came the break that changed everything. A neighbor's old security camera, recently repaired, revealed archived footage. The video showed a figure walking across the street just after midnight. The timestamp matched the night Laura vanished. The figure carried something heavy, wrapped in a tarp. It was coming from Daniel's house. Police obtained a warrant. Inside, they found traces of cleaning chemicals far stronger than normal household use. In the garage, beneath a false panel, they found tools that matched marks near the burial site. The final piece was digital, deleted search history recovered from his computer, questions about decomposition, soil density, and how long scent remains detectable. Daniel Rowe was arrested quietly at dawn. During interrogation, he said very little. But what he did say stunned detectives. He admitted he had watched Laura for months, learned her schedule, her habits, her routines. He chose her because she was predictable, because no one paid attention. The quiet street had protected him. At trial, neighbors filled the courtroom, sitting stiffly in their seats, struggling to reconcile the man they waved to with the evidence displayed on screens. Prosecutors laid out a meticulous timeline. Defense arguments collapsed under digital proof and forensic detail. Daniel was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Maple Crescent never felt the same again. Some families moved away. Others installed cameras, brighter lights, higher fences. The street remained clean and calm, but the innocence was gone. People talked more now. They listened. They noticed. And when newcomers asked why everyone seemed so cautious, longtime residents gave the same quiet answer: because we learned the hard way. Evil doesn't always look loud or dangerous. Sometimes it lives right across the street. He was the kind of man people described with easy words: helpful, polite, dependable. He waved every morning, shoveled snow from elderly neighbors' driveways, fixed broken fences without being asked. At block parties, he grilled burgers and made people laugh. Parents felt safe letting their children walk past his house. Oh, that was why no one questioned him. The town of Ridgefall was small, the kind where rumors traveled faster than police reports. But when 22-year-old Hannah Pierce failed to come home one Friday night, no one whispered Mark's name. They whispered about boyfriends, parties, bad decisions, anything but him. Hannah had last been seen leaving her evening shift at the cafe just before closing. She sent a text to her roommate: "On my way home." She never arrived. Her phone went dead an hour later. Police began searching the next morning. Flyers went up on every pole. Volunteers combed the woods. Search dogs traced her scent halfway down Oak Street before losing it near a row of tidy houses, including Mark Holloway's. Still, nobody suspected him. Mark joined the search. He brought coffee to volunteers. He hugged Hannah's mother when she cried. He told reporters how heartbreaking it was to lose someone so young. Cameras caught him wiping his eyes. Behind the scenes, investigators were uneasy. Hannah's phone records showed something odd: a short call made minutes before it shut off. The number belonged to Mark. When questioned, he smiled calmly and said Hannah had called to ask for help with her car. He claimed he told her to call roadside assistance instead. Simple. Reasonable. Except her car had been found parked perfectly outside her apartment. No sign of trouble. Then came the first crack. A delivery driver reported seeing Hannah talking to a man near Oak Street that night. The description was vague, but the jacket stood out: dark blue, reflective strip on the sleeve. Police quietly checked nearby homes. Mark owned that jacket. When asked about it, he laughed lightly and said, "Half the town owns one like that." He wasn't wrong. But investigators were no longer convinced coincidence explained everything. They obtained phone location data. Mark's phone had left his house late that night. It traveled down Oak Street, then toward the old quarry road, then back again before dawn. He had told police he never left home. Search teams were redirected to the quarry. 3 days later, they found her. Hannah's body had been concealed beneath loose gravel and branches. There were no obvious signs of violence at first glance, which made the discovery even more chilling. The medical examiner later confirmed she had been suffocated. The town went silent. News spread fast, and suddenly Mark Holloway's friendly smile looked different in every photo. Neighbors replayed conversations in their minds. The jokes, the favors, the moments they had trusted him without question. Police searched his home with a warrant. They found fibers matching Hannah's clothing in his car trunk. They recovered a deleted message draft on his phone that read, "I didn't mean for this to happen." During interrogation, his calm finally cracked. He admitted he had offered Hannah a ride after seeing her walking alone. He said she trusted him, because everyone did. An argument followed. He claimed panic, he claimed accident, but evidence told another story. At trial, prosecutors described how trust had been his camouflage, how he blended into the community so well that no one ever imagined he could harm someone. Witness after witness testified to how nice he was. The jury didn't confuse kindness with innocence. Mark Holloway was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Ridgefall changed after that. People locked their doors more often. Smiles became cautious, conversations shorter. The belief that evil looked obvious had died with Hannah. Today, her photo still hangs in the cafe where she worked. Beneath it is a simple message written by her mother. Trust carefully. Pay attention. Even the kindest faces can hide the darkest truths. At 4:47 a.m., the street lig. HTS on Harbor Lane flickered the way they always did, briefly dimming before settling back into their dull orange glow. Most of the neighborhood was asleep. Only one house showed signs of life. That house belonged to 19-year-old Rachel Moore. Rachel worked the early shift at a bakery across town. Every morning she left before sunrise, walked 2 blocks to the bus stop, and texted her mother when she arrived safely. It was their routine. It never changed, until the morning it did. At 5:02 a.m., her mother received a message that read only, "Running a little late." That message would become the last confirmed contact anyone ever had with Rachel. When she didn't come home that afternoon, her mother assumed overtime. By evening, worry set in. By midnight, police were called. Rachel's room looked untouched. Her uniform was missing. Her phone charger still plugged into the wall. Her wallet sat on her desk. Everything suggested she had left in a hurry, but not by choice. Investigators focused on the bus stop first. Security footage from a nearby store showed Rachel arriving at 4:55 a.m., hood pulled tight against the cold. She stood alone, scrolling on her phone. Then, at 5:01 a.m., a dark sedan slowed near the curb. The footage was grainy but clear enough to show Rachel stepping back. The car stopped. The passenger window lowered. There was a brief exchange, no audio, just gestures. Then something changed. Rachel stepped backward again. The car door opened. The camera froze for 2 seconds due to a buffering glitch. When the image returned, the bus stop was empty. The sedan was gone. The timestamp read 5:03 a.m. That 2-minute gap haunted investigators. The car's license plate was unreadable. No witnesses came forward. The street had been quiet, the kind of quiet that hides things. Police expanded the search. Dive teams checked the harbor. Volunteers searched wooded AR. Flyers went up across the city. Weeks passed with no sign of Rachel. Then a break came from an unlikely place. A mechanic in a neighboring town contacted police after seeing the missing person alert. He said a man had brought in a dark sedan with a damaged passenger side door shortly after Rachel vanished. The driver claimed he'd hit a pole. The mechanic remembered him because the man seemed nervous, overly polite, talkative, eager to leave. Records identified the customer as Evan Keller, 34, a warehouse supervisor with no criminal history. Detectives paid him a visit. Evan lived alone in a rented duplex. He appeared cooperative, calm, almost too calm. He said he worked nights and had no idea who Rachel was. But his phone data told a different story. His location placed him near Harbor Lane at 5 a.m. When confronted, he claimed he had taken a shortcut home. But investigators had already obtained traffic camera footage showing his car circling the block twice before stopping near the bus stop. A search warrant followed. Inside his garage, police found traces of dirt and plant matter matching soil near the harbor embankment. In the trunk, forensic teams found fibers consistent with Rachel's jacket. Still, there was no body. For weeks, Evan denied everything. He asked for a lawyer. The case stalled again, and public frustration grew. Candlelight vigils filled the sidewalk where Rachel was last seen. Her mother stood there every night, refusing to give up. Then, nearly 3 months later, a fisherman made a discovery along a rocky inlet several miles from town. Rachel had been there all along. The medical examiner determined she had died shortly after her disappearance. Evidence pointed to suffocation. There were no signs of prolonged captivity, only a sudden, violent end. The case against Evan collapsed inward like a trap closing. Digital forensic experts recov. Arid deleted messages from his phone. Searches like how long before a body is found in water, and can phone GPS be traced when off appeared days after Rachel vanished. More chilling was a draft note never sent, saved in his cloud storage. "I didn't mean to scare her." She panicked. Everything went wrong. At trial, prosecutors painted a clear picture. A predatory encounter in the early morning darkness. A moment of control turning fatal. Evan had chosen a time when witnesses were scarce and fear could be exploited. The defense argued accident, panic, bad judgment. The jury didn't agree. Evan Keller was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years in prison. Today, the bus stop on Harbor Lane looks ordinary again. Fresh paint, new lighting, a small bench installed by the city, but locals still avoid it before sunrise. And Rachel's mother still keeps her phone on at night just in case, haunted by a message that came too early, and a daughter who never made it to work. From the outside, the Collins family looked like a picture cut from a magazine. Their white two-story house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. The lawn was always trimmed. Holiday decorations went up early and came down neatly. Neighbors often saw family barbecues, laughter drifting over the fence, smiling photos posted online with captions about gratitude and love. Daniel Collins was a respected financial advisor. His wife, Melissa, volunteered at the local school. Their 2 children were well-behaved, polite, and always neatly dressed. No one suspected anything was wrong. Until one night, when Melissa didn't answer her phone, her sister tried calling again and again. No reply. By morning, panic set in. Melissa never ignored calls, especially from family. Police were sent to the house for a welfare check. The front door was unlocked. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. Shoes by the door, breakfast dishes in the sink, a half-folded load of laundry on the couch. But Melissa wasn't there. Daniel told officers she had gone out the night before after an argument. He said she needed space. Said she often took drives to calm down. He looked tired, worried, cooperative. But something didn't sit right. Melissa had left her purse behind. Her phone, too. Her car was still in the garage. Investigators knew immediately. People don't go for a drive without those things. The case quickly became a missing person investigation. Friends described Melissa as devoted to her children, careful, routine-oriented. She had recently confided in one friend that she felt trapped but hadn't explained why. Police began interviewing neighbors. One mentioned hearing raised voices the night before Melissa vanished. Another recalled a loud thump, followed by silence. But no one had called police. Arguments happened. Marriages were complicated. People minded their business. Daniel remained calm under questioning. He repeated the same story. He said they argued about finances. He said Melissa stormed out. He said he went to bed. But detectives noticed inconsistencies. His timeline shifted slightly each time he told it. Minutes changed. Details blurred. Then forensic analysts examined the house more closely. In the laundry room, beneath freshly cleaned tiles, they detected trace amounts of blood. It had been scrubbed thoroughly. Too thoroughly. Luminol testing revealed a larger pattern beneath the surface. The perfect home suddenly felt staged. Police obtained a warrant to search Daniel's car. In the trunk, they found cleaning supplies, gloves, and a tarp, all recently used. GPS data from the vehicle showed a late-night trip to a remote wooded area 40 miles away. Search teams were sent out immediately. 2 days later, they found Melissa. She had been buried allowly, wrapped carefully, almost gently. The medical examiner ruled her death a result of blunt force trauma. The injuries were consistent with a domestic altercation that escalated. The community was stunned. The man who coached soccer. The man who hosted barbecues. The man everyone trusted. Daniel was arrested without resistance. During interrogation, his story unraveled. He admitted they had been fighting more often. Melissa had threatened to leave. She had talked about taking the kids, about telling people things he couldn't allow. He claimed he lost control for just a moment. Prosecutors didn't accept that explanation. At trial, the image of the perfect family was dismantled piece by piece. Text messages revealed manipulation and control. Financial records showed secret accounts. Friends testified about Melissa's growing fear. One message she sent weeks before her death read, "If anything happens to me, please look at Daniel." The courtroom sat in silence as those words were read aloud. Daniel was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The children were placed with relatives. The house was sold. The cul-de-sac returned to its quiet routine. But something had shifted. Neighbors no longer assumed happiness meant safety. Melissa's story became a reminder whispered among the community that danger doesn't always come from strangers, and evil doesn't always look loud or cruel. Sometimes it smiles for family photos. Sometimes it lives in a perfect house at the end of a perfect street. The emergency call came in at 11:43 p.m. The dispatcher almost missed it. The line was quiet at first, filled only with faint breathing and what sounded like movement in the background. Then a woman's voice whispered, shaky and rushed, "Please, I don't have much time." Her name was Elena Ramirez. She lived alone in a small apartment complex on the Edge of town. She was 27, worked as a medical assistant, and was known for being careful, organized, and responsible. She wasn't the kind of person who made prank calls or panicked easily. The dispatcher asked what was wrong. There was a pause. Then Elena said, "Someone is in my apartment. I think he's been here before." Before the dispatcher could ask more, a loud sound came through the line, a thud, followed by hurried footsteps. Elena whispered one last sentence. "If something happens to me, please check the stairwell camera." The call disconnected. Police were dispatched immediately. When officers arrived less than 6 minutes later, they found Elena's apartment door unlocked. The lights were on. Her phone lay on the kitchen floor, screen cracked. There were signs of a struggle. A chair knocked over, a lamp broken, drawers pulled open. But Elena was gone. The building was sealed. Tenants were interviewed. No one claimed to have heard anything unusual. It was late. People were asleep, or pretending to be. Security footage from the building's entrance showed Elena returning home at 11:21 p.m. She looked tired but calm. She unlocked her door and went inside. 5 minutes later, the stairwell camera glitched. For exactly 37 seconds, the video froze. When it resumed, a hooded figure was seen exiting the stairwell and walking out of the building. The person's face was never visible. The case exploded across local news by morning. Elena Ramirez missing after chilling 911 call. Her voice was played repeatedly on television, the whisper sending chills through anyone who heard it. Tips poured in, hundreds of them. Most led nowhere. Detectives began reconstructing Elena's life. She had no criminal history, no known enemies. But coworkers mentioned something troubling. She had recently complained about someone watching her. She said she felt followed on her walk home. She had even changed her routine. One coworker recalled Elena saying, "If something happens to me, it won't be random." Police pulled phone records. In the weeks before her disappearance, Elena had received repeated calls from a blocked number. Most were silent. A few lasted only seconds. One voicemail stood out, heavy breathing, then a click. The calls stopped 3 days before she vanished. Investigators traced cell tower pings linked to the stairwell footage timeframe. One phone appeared near the building during the exact window, a prepaid device, activated only days earlier. But there was a mistake. That phone had briefly connected to a nearby Wi-Fi router, a router registered to apartment 3B. The tenant of 3 Billions was a man named Victor Hale. He was quiet, recently moved in, and described by neighbors as polite but distant. He worked nights, kept to himself, no criminal record, no obvious red flags. When questioned, Victor denied knowing Elena beyond casual hallway greetings. He claimed he was at work during the time of the incident, but his employer said he had called in sick that night. A search warrant was issued. Inside Victor's apartment, police found something that changed the case instantly: a second phone hidden inside a shoebox, a prepaid phone, the same model tied to the blocked calls. On it were deleted drafts of messages, never sent, describing Elena's routines, her work schedule, even notes about when her lights went out. One draft read, "She always locks the door. Need another way." Forensics also recovered fragments of video files, corrupted, incomplete, but enough to show Elena's apartment interior from an angle near the doorway. The stairwell camera glitch was no accident. Victor had accessed the building's network days earlier using stolen login credentials. He had learned how to interrupt the feed. When confronted with the Evide NCE, he broke. He admitted to watching Elena for weeks. He claimed he just wanted to talk to her. He said things got out of control. He refused to explain where she was. Search teams expanded their efforts. 2 weeks later, hikers discovered disturbed ground in a wooded area behind the complex. Elena was found there. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. The case never went to trial. Victor pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. At sentencing, the 911 call was played one final time. The courtroom was silent except for Elena's trembling voice. Calm, brave, trying to help herself even in fear. Her family later said that call was both their heartbreak and their justice, because without it, no one would have known where to start. Today, the apartment complex has new lighting, new cameras, new locks. The stairwell camera no longer glitches. And every year on the anniversary of Elena's disappearance, dispatchers across the county pause for a moment of silence, honoring the call that changed everything. The house on Willow Drive looked like a dream. White fence, blue shutters, fresh flowers lining the porch. Every morning the curtains opened at the same time, and every evening the porch light glowed warmly. It was the kind of place people pointed to and said, "That's a good family." Inside lived Thomas and Claire Reynolds. They had been married for 12 years, no children, no police record, no drama that anyone could see. Thomas worked in insurance. Claire taught elementary school. Their neighbors described them as quiet, respectful, and a little private, but sweet. That's why the 911 call made no sense. At 6:18 a.m., Thomas called emergency services, his voice shaking. "My wife? She's not breathing. I just woke up and found her." Paramedics arrived within minutes. Claire was lying in bed, neatly veered with a blanket. There were no visible injuries, no signs of struggle, no forced entry. She was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, police believed it might be natural causes. Claire had complained of migraines before. There were no overturned items, no chaos. The house looked peaceful, almost staged, but the medical examiner hesitated. There were faint marks on Claire's neck. Not obvious bruises, but pressure marks inconsistent with natural death. Toxicology came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol. The cause of death was ruled asphyxiation. Suddenly, the perfect home became a potential crime scene. Detectives interviewed Thomas again. He said they had gone to bed around 10 p.m. He claimed he slept deeply and noticed nothing unusual. He said he loved his wife, said they were happy. But investigators noticed something strange. Thomas never asked how Claire died. Not once. They began digging into the couple's private life. Friends revealed cracks beneath the surface. Claire had confided to a coworker that her marriage felt controlled, that Thomas monitored finances, that he didn't like her going out alone, that arguments had become more frequent. A coworker even recalled Claire joking nervously, "If I ever disappear, check my house first." Police pulled phone records. In the months before her death, Claire had searched phrases like signs of emotional abuse, how to leave safely, and can a spouse track your phone? She had also contacted a divorce attorney. Quietly, that information changed everything. Investigators re-examined the bedroom, the pillows, the bedding, the mattress. Fibers were collected. Patterns analyzed. They discovered uneven pressure marks suggesting force had been applied while Claire was asleep. The scene had been cleaned carefully. Too carefully. Thomas was brought in again. This time, detectives confronted him with evidence. He denied everything, repeating that he must have slept through it. But inconsistencies appeared. His timeline shifted. His calm cracked. His answers became defensive. Then came the digital evidence. A smartwatch he wore to bed recorded elevated heart rate activity at 2:14 a.m., lasting several minutes. Movement data showed him awake and active, contradicting his claim that he slept through the night. Claire's smartwatch told a darker story. Her heart rate spiked suddenly, then dropped. At 2:17 a.m., prosecutors later called it a silent timeline of violence. When confronted with the data, Thomas stopped talking. He was arrested later that day. The town was stunned. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the man who waved from behind a white fence with the evidence presented in court. Friends testified about dinner parties and laughter. The defense argued stress, accident, misunderstanding, but the prosecution painted a different picture, one of control hidden behind courtesy, of anger masked by politeness. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Thomas Reynolds was sentenced to life in prison. The white picket fence still stands today. New owners live there now, fresh paint, new flowers, a different family, but longtime residents still remember. They remember how evil didn't break in from the outside. It lived quietly inside, smiling, waving, and pretending everything was perfect. Maria Lopez had gone to the police twice before anyone listened. The first time, she walked into the station shaking, clutching her phone, her voice barely steady as she said, "Someone keeps following me." The officer on duty asked routine questions. Did she know who it was? Had the person touched her? Threatened her? Maria said no, not directly. Just the same man, again and again, on her walk home, outside her workplace, sitting in a parked car across the street some nig. Without a name or a crime, the report went nowhere. The second time she came back, 2 weeks later, she was more afraid. She told them someone had been inside her apartment. Nothing was stolen, but items had been moved. A chair turned, a window unlocked, her closet door left slightly open. Police checked the place. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints that led anywhere. They told her it might be stress, maybe forgetfulness, maybe anxiety. Maria nodded politely, but when she left the station she cried in her car. She was 24 years old, living alone for the first time, working late shifts at a pharmacy. She didn't feel safe anymore. She started sleeping with the lights on. She changed her routes home. She stopped posting online. Still, the feeling never left. Then the notes started. Small slips of paper appeared under her door. "You forgot to lock it. You look tired tonight. You should be more careful." Maria took one of the notes to the police. This time the officer frowned. A report was filed. Patrols were increased. She was told to call immediately if she saw anything suspicious. 3 nights later, she did. At 1:12 a.m., Maria dialed 911. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She said someone was inside her apartment again. She said she could hear breathing. The dispatcher told her to stay on the line and lock herself in a room if possible. "I can't," Maria whispered. "My door won't close." There was a soft sound, fabric brushing against something. Then a sharp inhale. The line went silent. Officers arrived in under 4 minutes. The apartment door was ajar. Inside, everything looked eerily calm. No signs of struggle, no broken furniture, just silence. Maria was gone. The case exploded across the city. Media questioned how someone could vanish from a locked apartment while police were already on the way. Detectives worked non-stop. They disco. Veered something chilling. The maintenance logs showed that the lock on Maria's door had been replaced 2 months earlier. The work order was signed by a contract maintenance worker named Aaron Pike. Aaron had access to master keys. He had been employed by the building off and on for years. Quiet, reliable, rarely noticed. Police pulled his work records. He had serviced Maria's apartment multiple times, more than necessary. Each visit logged as routine inspection. Surveillance footage showed him entering the building late at night on multiple occasions, using his key. Always alone. Always careful to avoid cameras. When officers searched his residence, they found notebooks, pages and pages filled with observations, schedules, notes about tenants, drawings of apartment layouts. Maria's name appeared again and again. They also found her phone, hidden inside a toolbox. That discovery led them to a wooded construction site several miles away. Maria was found there the next morning. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide. Evidence showed she had fought back. She had tried to escape. Her final call had not been too late, but it had come just minutes before she was taken. Aaron Pike was arrested and charged with murder, stalking, and unlawful surveillance. During interrogation, he showed no emotion. He said only one thing: she should have stopped calling the police. At trial, prosecutors dismantled his quiet image. They showed how access had given him power, how ignored warnings had given him time, how small complaints, dismissed as fear or imagination, had added up to tragedy. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. He was sentenced to life in prison. After Maria's death, the city changed its policies. Maintenance access rules were tightened. Emergency calls involving stalking were prioritized. Training protocols were rewritten. But for her family, none of it came soon enough. A plaque now hangs near the entrance of her old building. It bears her name and a single line beneath it. She asked for help. We must listen. For decades, Pine Hollow prided itself on being peaceful. It was the kind of town where doors stayed unlocked, where everyone knew everyone, and where gossip traveled faster than the mail. People believed nothing truly bad could happen there. Not really. not until the night 12-year-old Lily Harper didn't come home. She had left her friend's house just before sunset, riding her bike along the familiar dirt road that cut through town. It was a route she had taken hundreds of times. Her parents expected her back within 20 minutes. She never arrived. At first, neighbors assumed a delay. Maybe she stopped to talk, maybe her bike had a flat. But as darkness fell and her phone went unanswered, panic spread quickly. Search parties formed within hours. Flashlights swept fields and ditches. Volunteers called her name into the woods. Police dogs followed her scent down the dirt road, then suddenly lost it near the old grain shed on the edge of town. By morning, the entire town was searching. Then someone found the bike. It was lying neatly on its side, as if placed there. No skid marks, no sign of a crash, just Lily's pink helmet resting on the handlebar. The town fell silent. State investigators were brought in. Roadblocks went up. News vans lined the main street. Everyone was interviewed. Neighbors, teachers, store owners, friends. One name came up again and again: Ben Carter. Ben was a local volunteer. He helped organize searches, handed out water, comforted Lily's parents. He spoke to reporters with concern in his voice, saying things like, "We'll find her. Pine Hollow takes care of its own." He was trusted. He always had been. Ben had lived in Pine Hollow his entire life. He coached Little League, helped Ed fix roofs, drove the church van on Sundays. People said if anyone knew the back roads, it was him. That's what made his story so believable. He told police he had seen Lily riding earlier that evening and waved at her. Said she looked happy. Said she turned toward home. It was a small detail. Too small. Investigators noticed that Ben mentioned Lily's helmet, even though police had not yet released that detail to the public. When asked about it later, he said he must have heard it somewhere, but no one else had mentioned it. Detectives began looking closer. They pulled phone data. Ben's phone had been off for nearly 2 hours the night Lily disappeared. He claimed the battery died, but records showed it had been fully charged earlier that day. Then came the surveillance footage. A grain elevator several miles outside town had a security camera pointed at the access road. At 7:42 p.m., a pickup truck drove past. The timestamp matched the window of Lily's disappearance. The truck was Ben's. When questioned again, his story changed. He said he had gone for a drive to clear his head. He said he didn't remember where he went. He said he was stressed. The lie began to crack. Search teams were redirected to the area near the grain elevator. After 2 days, they found disturbed earth behind a line of trees. Lily was there. The town broke. People who had searched beside Ben now realized they had been standing next to the person responsible. Parents pulled their children closer. Neighbors locked doors for the first time in memory. Ben was arrested that night. During interrogation, he denied everything at first. Then, slowly, the story unraveled. He admitted he had offered Lily a ride, saying her parents were looking for her. He said she trusted him, because everyone did. That trust became the town's greatest regret. At trial, prosecutors laid out how Ben had used his reputation as camouflage, how his helpfulness had shielded him from suspicion, how his lies, small at first, had grown until they exposed him. Witnesses testified through tears. Lily's parents sat holding hands, unmoving. Ben was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Pine Hollow was never the same. The grain shed was torn down. The road was renamed. The annual town festival was quietly discontinued. People spoke more carefully, watched more closely. And when new families moved in, longtime residents would offer the same quiet warning. Trust is important here, but never let it blind you. The call came in just after noon, ordinary and unremarkable. A contractor had been hired to install a new fence behind a small brick house on Elm Street. While digging post holes, his shovel struck something solid. At first, he thought it was a rock. Then he saw fabric. Police arrived within minutes. What they uncovered beneath the soft soil would reopen a mystery the town had stopped talking about years earlier. The remains were human, and they were buried less than 3 feet from the back porch. The house belonged to the Whitman family, a quiet couple in their late 40s, who had lived there for nearly 20 years. They were well known in the neighborhood, rarely social but polite. No noise complaints, no trouble, nothing unusual, except one thing. 14 years earlier, a young woman named Erica Sloan had vanished. She was 21, a college student who rented a basement room 2 streets away. She disappeared one evening after telling a friend she was going out to return a borrowed book. Her phone went dead that night. Despite searches and flyers, she was never found. Over time, the case went cold, until the backyard on Elm Street was dug up. Forensic testing confirmed the remains were Erica's. The discovery shocked the town, but what came next shocked them even more. The Whitmans told police they had no idea how a body could be buried on their property. They said the previous owners must be responsible. They insisted they had never dug in that area. But records told a different story. The fence line had been replaced only 5 years earlier. Soil samples showed the burial was much more recent than 14 years old. Someone had disturbed the ground long after Erica vanished. Investigators began to look closer at the couple. Neighbors mentioned that the Whitmans were extremely private. They never allowed guests into their backyard. They kept the curtains drawn. They discouraged conversation. Then a former co-worker of Mr. Whitman came forward with something unsettling. Years ago, he had overheard Whitman joking about knowing how to make problems disappear. At the time, it sounded like dark humor. Now it didn't. Police obtained a search warrant. Inside the house, they found boxes of old belongings, some not belonging to the Whitmans. Jewelry, clothing, a scarf later confirmed to be Erica's. Hidden in the garage attic, wrapped carefully in plastic. Digital evidence sealed the case. On an old desktop computer, investigators recovered deleted files, searches about decomposition, soil acidity, and how long remains could stay hidden underground. The timestamps aligned with the years after Erica disappeared. More chilling were journal entries. Short, emotionless notes describing mistakes, control, and silence. One entry read, "She trusted me. That was the hardest part." The truth began to surface. Investigators determined that Erica had known Mr. Whitman casually through a part-time job. On the night she vanished, he had offered her a ride home. Instead, she was taken to his house. What happened next would never be fully known. When confronted, Mrs. Whitman claimed she knew nothing, but evidence showed otherwise. Soil residue was found on her gardening tools. Her handwriting matched notes labeling storage boxes connected to the crime. Prosecutors argued she helped conceal the body years later, not out of fear, but loyalty. The town struggled to process it. The couple who waved politely, who paid taxes on time, who lived quietly for decades, had been hiding a young woman in their backyard. Both were arrested. Mr. Whitman eventually confessed in a recorded interview, admitting he believed time would erase the mistake. He said he never expected anyone to dig there again. He was wrong. At trial, the courtroom was packed. Erica's family sat in the front row, holding photos taken before she vanished. The jury listened as experts detailed how the burial had been deliberately concealed, how the truth had been layered under years of normal life. Mr. Whitman was convicted of murder. Mrs. Whitman was convicted of accessory after the fact. The house on Elm Street was demolished shortly after the trial. Grass was planted where it once stood. Today, people walk past without knowing the full story. But longtime residents remember. They remember how evil can hide quietly, patiently, beneath ordinary lives, and how sometimes the truth waits just beneath the surface. Everyone in Brookvale knew the bus schedule by heart. At 9:40 p.m., the final city bus rolled through Main Street, carrying only a handful of tired passengers heading home from late shifts. It was routine, predictable, safe, or so people believed. On a rainy Thursday night, 26-year-old Natalie Brooks boarded that bus after finishing work at a grocery store. She texted her sister as she sat down near the back, "On my way. See you soon." That message would be the last anyone ever received from her. When Natalie didn't arrive home, her sister assumed she'd missed the stop or fallen asleep. But by morning, panic set in. Natalie never ignored Mesa. Geez, never disappeared. Police were called before sunrise. The bus route became the focus immediately. Transit cameras showed Natalie boarding at 9:38 p.m., shaking rain from her jacket. She smiled briefly at the driver and took her usual seat. The bus was mostly empty, only 3 other passengers scattered inside. At 9:51 p.m., the bus stopped at Oak Street. That was Natalie's stop, but the footage showed something strange. She stood up, walked toward the door, then hesitated. The driver appeared to say something. The camera had no audio, but the exchange lasted several seconds. Then Natalie sat back down. The bus pulled away. That moment puzzled investigators. Why hadn't she gotten off? The next stop was nearly 2 miles away, bordering an industrial stretch with warehouses and empty lots. There were no homes nearby. No reason for her to be there. At 10:02 p.m., the bus stopped again. This time, Natalie stood and exited. The camera showed her stepping into the rain, glancing back toward the driver before the doors closed. She was never seen again. Police questioned the driver, a man named Robert Hale, who had worked the route for over a decade. He said Natalie had asked if the bus went closer to her street. He told her no. He claimed she chose to ride farther on her own. His explanation sounded reasonable. Too reasonable. Investigators reviewed weeks of footage. They noticed a pattern. Natalie had ridden this same route dozens of times. She always exited at Oak Street. Never once had she stayed on longer. Why that night? Transit logs revealed something else. The bus's internal camera covering the driver's area had been manually disabled for 6 minutes that evening. Starting just before Oak Street, only the driver had access to that control. When confronted, Robert claimed it was a malfunction, but technicians found no mechanical issue. Police dug deeper. Cell phone. E-data placed Robert's phone near the industrial area for nearly an hour after his shift should have ended. He had claimed he went straight home. Search teams were sent to the area near the final stop. 2 days later, they found Natalie's bag hidden behind a stack of pallets in an abandoned loading zone. Her phone was inside. The screen was cracked. The last message still unsent. Farther into the wooded edge behind the warehouses, investigators made the discovery they feared most. Natalie's body was found concealed under debris. The autopsy revealed she had been assaulted and killed shortly after leaving the bus. The case against Robert began to solidify. Investigators uncovered complaints filed years earlier, vague reports from female passengers who said the driver made them uncomfortable, asked personal questions, or insisted they stay on the bus longer for safety. None had escalated. None had been taken seriously. Until now. Inside Robert's locker, police found a notebook containing handwritten route notes and names. Natalie's name was circled. Confronted with the evidence, Robert initially denied everything. Then his story changed. Then it fell apart entirely. He eventually confessed. He said he chose the last route because it was quiet, predictable. He said he never expected it to go that far. The trial drew national attention. Prosecutors argued that his position gave him power, authority that made passengers trust him. That trust, they said, became his weapon. The jury agreed. Robert Hale was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the case, the city made sweeping changes: new cameras, panic buttons, GPS tracking, and stricter driver oversight. Training programs were rewritten. Riders were encouraged to report anything that felt wrong. At the Oak Street stop, a small plaque now sits beside the bench. It reads, "In memory of Natalie Brooks. Always ride safely. Always speak up." And every night at 9:40, when the last bus rolls through Brookvale, someone still looks at the empty seat near the back, remembering the ride that should have ended at home. Riverbend had one traffic light, one grocery store, and one rule everyone followed without saying it out loud: don't cause trouble. People grew up there, married there, and were buried there. Outsiders called it peaceful. Locals called it protected. That protection began to crack the night 17-year-old Caleb Morris didn't come home. Caleb had gone to a football bonfire just outside town limits. His parents expected him back before midnight. When his truck never pulled into the driveway, they assumed he'd stayed with a friend. By morning, fear took over. His phone went straight to voicemail. His truck was later found parked near the old quarry road, keys still in the ignition. There were no signs of a crash, no signs of theft, just silence. Police opened an investigation, but it moved slowly, strangely slowly. Officers told the family Caleb was probably blowing off steam. Maybe he ran away. Maybe he'd get in touch soon. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors began to circulate. Some said Caleb had gotten into trouble. Others claimed he owed someone money, A few why. Spared that he had seen something he wasn't supposed to see. Those whispers stopped quickly. People who asked too many questions were told to let the police do their job, but Caleb's mother didn't stop asking. She began keeping notes, writing down names, times, contradictions. She noticed how often the same people appeared in every version of the story, especially the town sheriff, Earl Benton. Sheriff Benton had known Caleb since he was a child. He'd coached his Little League team, attended his birthday parties. Publicly, he expressed concern. Privately, he seemed eager to close the case. Too eager. When search volunteers wanted to expand beyond the quarry, Benton denied the request. When a state investigator offered assistance, he declined. When a deputy suggested revisiting witness statements, he reassigned him. Things didn't add up. Then a former town employee came forward anonymously. He claimed that on the night Caleb disappeared, he saw the sheriff's cruiser parked near the quarry, long after Benton said he'd gone home. The man said he didn't speak up sooner because people who cause problems in Riverbend don't stay long. That tip reached state authorities. An outside task force was quietly assigned. They pulled GPS records from county vehicles. One patrol car showed movement late that night, stopping near the quarry for nearly 40 minutes. It was Sheriff Benton's. When questioned, Benton said the tracker must be wrong. He insisted he was asleep at home, but his phone data contradicted him. Texts were sent during that same time window. Investigators began digging deeper. They learned Caleb had recently argued with the sheriff's nephew at the bonfire. Witnesses said the argument got heated. Something about a video on a phone. Something embarrassing. That phone was never recovered. Search teams returned to the quarry with new equipment. 3 days later, divers found something wedged between rocks beneath the waterline. Human remains. Dental records confirmed it was Caleb. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The case exploded overnight. State police took full control. The town went silent. Evidence began surfacing fast. Witnesses who had once stayed quiet started talking. One admitted seeing Caleb push during the argument. Another said the sheriff arrived shortly after and ordered everyone to leave. A third claimed Benton threatened him afterwards, saying, "You don't want to ruin your future." Under mounting pressure, Benton resigned. Then he was arrested. Prosecutors revealed their theory. The argument at the bonfire escalated. Caleb was injured and the sheriff intervened. Not to help, but to protect his nephew. Evidence was hidden. Reports altered. A cover-up built piece by piece. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Text messages, GPS data, witness testimony, and forensic evidence painted a picture of abuse of power woven through years of unquestioned authority. The jury found Benton guilty of obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and being an accessory to manslaughter. His nephew was convicted separately. Riverbend changed forever. The police department was dissolved and rebuilt under state oversight. New leadership arrived. Old loyalties broke apart. People who had stayed silent for years finally spoke. A memorial now stands near the quarry with Caleb's name engraved in stone. Beneath it are words chosen by his mother. Truth survives, even when a town tries to bury it. The scream came from inside the house, sharp, sudden, and cut short. At 7:18 a.m., neighbors on Hawthorne Drive heard it through open windows as they were getting ready for work. One woman froze with her coffee cup in hand. Another stepped onto her porch, scanning the quiet street. Then everything went silent again. 10 minutes later, a sea. All came into 911 from inside the same house. A man's voice, shaking. "My wife. She's bleeding. Please hurry." Police arrived to find the front door wide open. A white welcome mat lay crooked on the porch, darkened by a spreading stain that no amount of scrubbing would later remove. Inside, they found 34-year-old Rachel Turner lying in the entryway. She had been stabbed multiple times. Paramedics tried to save her, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. Her husband, Andrew Turner, stood nearby with blood on his hands and shirt. He said he had found her that way when he came downstairs. He claimed someone must have broken in during the night. At first glance, it seemed plausible. The door showed signs of forced entry. A vase was shattered. A drawer in the living room had been pulled open. Everything looked chaotic, like a burglary gone wrong. But detectives quickly noticed something strange. Nothing was actually missing. Rachel's purse sat untouched on the table. Jewelry remained in plain sight. Electronics were still plugged in. Even cash lay openly in a bowl by the door. The break-in didn't make sense. Andrew insisted he had slept through the attack. He said he woke up early for work, came downstairs and found his wife. He claimed he tried to help her and must have gotten blood on himself then. But the medical examiner had questions. Rachel's wounds showed signs of a struggle. Defensive injuries on her arms, bruising consistent with a fight, and based on blood spatter patterns, the attack had not happened where Andrew claimed to find her. It had started in the kitchen. The trail led toward the front door. Investigators began to suspect staging. They examined the forced entry more closely. The door frame damage was inconsistent. The splintering went outward, not inward. Someone had forced it from inside. Then came the shoe prints, a partial bloody footprint. Near the welcome mat matched Andrew's size and brand of shoe. Not a perfect match, but close enough to raise serious concern. When questioned again, Andrew's story shifted slightly. He said maybe he had gone downstairs during the night and didn't remember. Maybe he moved things. Maybe he was in shock. Detectives pressed harder. They uncovered a history of tension in the marriage. Friends said Rachel had confided she wanted a divorce. She had met with a lawyer weeks earlier. She had started saving money quietly. Text messages recovered from her phone showed arguments escalating. In one message, Andrew wrote, "You're not leaving me. Not like this." Another read, "You're embarrassing me." Investigators also found something else. An online search on Andrew's laptop from 2 nights before. How to make a break-in look real. That search erased any remaining doubt. Still, Andrew denied killing his wife. He claimed someone else must have done it, and he was being framed. But forensic evidence told a clear story. Blood spatter on his clothes matched cast-off patterns from a stabbing motion. His fingerprints were on the knife, wiped but not fully cleaned. Fibers from his shirt were embedded in Rachel's wounds. The welcome mat, the symbol of hospitality, became the most haunting detail of all. It held the clearest imprint of his shoe. At trial, prosecutors described the crime as a performance, a staged scene meant to mislead, to buy time, to create doubt. But they argued Andrew underestimated science. Rachel's family sat in the front row every day. Her sister held the same photo of Rachel smiling in sunlight, taken just months before. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours. Andrew Turner was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Today the house on Hawthorne Drive has new owners. The welcome mat is gone. The door has been replaced. Fresh paint hides old stains, but neighbors still remember the morning sirens filled the street. They remember how safety can be an illusion, and how sometimes the most dangerous place isn't outside the door, but just beyond the welcome mat. No one in Briarwood remembered when the stranger first appeared. He was just there one day, sitting at the corner table of the local diner, walking slowly through the park, standing near the bulletin board outside the post office, reading notices that hadn't changed in years. He was polite, quiet, middle-aged. He said his name was Paul, and somehow he always seemed to know things he shouldn't. At first it was small. He congratulated a couple on their engagement before they had announced it. He asked a woman how her mother was recovering, even though the illness hadn't been mentioned publicly. He once told a shop owner, "You close early on Thursdays now, right?" Even though the sign hadn't been updated yet. People laughed it off. Small-town intuition, they said. Good memory. Coincidence? Then 17-year-old Tyler Grant disappeared. Tyler had gone for a jog one evening and never came back. His phone was later found on a trail near the river. There were no signs of a struggle, no witnesses, just silence. The town went into shock. Search parties formed immediately. Posters went up. Police questioned everyone. The mayor held press conferences promising answers, and Paul, the stranger, showed up to help. He joined the searches. He brought coffee. He offered directions through wooded areas. He spoke gently to Tyler's parents and told them, "He'll be found. I'm sure of it." What unsettled people wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it, too confident, too specific. At one search meeting, Paul casually mentioned the riverbank near the old culvert. "That's a tricky spot," he said. "Easy to miss if you don't know where to look." A volunteer asked how he knew that area so well. Paul smiled. "I walk a lot. Days later, investigators focused on that exact location, and that's where they found Tyler. The discovery devastated the town, but it also raised quiet questions. How had Paul known? Detectives took note. They began looking into him, and quickly realized no one actually knew much. He claimed to be passing through, said he had family somewhere north. He had no fixed address, no local job, and no clear reason for being in Briarwood. Yet he seemed deeply familiar with its routines. Police asked him to come in for a formal interview. Paul agreed easily, too easily. He spoke calmly, answered questions politely, never asked for a lawyer. He said he had nothing to hide, but his timeline didn't hold. Phone data showed he had been near the river the night Tyler disappeared. He said he'd been asleep at a nearby motel, but records showed he checked out early that morning. Investigators searched his belongings. Inside his backpack, they found a notebook. At first glance, it looked like harmless journaling, but page after page contained details about the town. Names, habits, routines. Times people walked their dogs. Which houses left lights on late. Which paths were quiet. One entry stood out: boy jogs alone. Same route. Same time. The date matched the night Tyler vanished. Police searched further. In a storage locker rented under Paul's name, they found clothing matching the description of what Tyler had been wearing, carefully folded, cleaned, and sealed in plastic. Paul was arrested that night. During interrogation, his calm finally cracked. He admitted he'd been drifting from town to town for years, watching, learning, waiting. He said he never planned to hurt anyone, only to understand them. But his words unraveled under pressure. He knew details only the killer could know. He described the riverbank in exact detail. He described Tyler's final moments. Details never released. The confession came slowly, piece by piece. At trial, prosecutors revealed that Briarwood wasn't the first place Paul had appeared. Similar disappearances in 2 other states were reopened. Patterns emerged, familiar behaviors, familiar timelines. The stranger who knew too much had been hiding in plain sight for years. The jury needed only 3 hours. Paul was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Afterward, the town tried to return to normal, but something had shifted. People noticed strangers more. Conversations became cautious. Smiles were measured. The diner removed the corner table. And when someone new arrived in Briarwood, people watched closely. Not with cruelty, but with awareness. Because they had learned something painful and permanent. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one who looks threatening, but the one who knows just a little too much. The security system at Westbridge Apartments was supposed to be foolproof. Dozens of cameras covered every entrance, hallway, stairwell, and parking area. Management proudly advertised it as one of the safest buildings in the city. Tenants felt protected, watched over, until the night the cameras went dark. At 2:13 a.m., the system stopped recording. Not all at once, just enough to create blind spots. At 2:47 a.m., 29-year-old Lauren Hayes vanished. Lauren was a graduate student who lived alone on the 4th floor. She was cautious, organized, and routine-driven. She always texted her sister before bed. She always locked her door. She always double-checked the hallway before stepping inside. That night, her final message read, "Almost home. Elevator slow again." She never sent another. The next morning, her sister came by when Lauren didn't answer her phone. The apartment door was locked. Inside, everything looked normal. Too normal. Her bag was on the table. Her keys were inside. Her laptop sat open, paused mid-document. But Lauren was gone. Police immediately reviewed the security footage. That's when they noticed the gap. From 2:10 a.m. to 3:02 a.m., several cameras on floors 3 and 4 had stopped recording. Others kept running. The outage wasn't building-wide. It was selective. Technicians called it unusual. When the footage resumed, the hallway was empty. No signs of forced entry. No noise complaints. No witnesses. It was as if Lauren had disappeared into the walls. Detectives began reconstructing her last movements. Elevator data showed she exited on the 4th floor at 2:11 a.m. that matched her final text. But she never made it to her apartment. A neighbor reported hearing soft voices around that time. Not shouting, not arguing. Just quiet conversation drifting through the hall. Another tenant remembered seeing a maintenance cart near the stairwell earlier that night, even though no repairs were scheduled. That detail changed everything. The building's maintenance supervisor was a man named Eric Dalton. He had worked there for 7 years, reliable, friendly, trusted with master keys and system access. When questioned, Eric said he'd been home asleep. He denied working overnight, but logs showed his access card had been used at 1:58 a.m. Then came the technical discovery that cracked the case. The camera system hadn't malfunctioned. It had been manually overridden from a local control panel, one only maintenance staff could access. The override required a physical key and a password. Eric's credentials. Police obtained a warrant to search his maintenance office. Inside, they found a flash drive hidden behind a breaker panel. It contained dozens of short video clips, hallway footage recorded outside different apartments, some dated months earlier. Time-stamped, labeled. One folder was marked LH, Lauren Hayes. The videos showed her returning home on different nights, unlocking her door, checking her phone, unaware she was being watched. The discovery horrified investigators. Search teams were immediately sent to locations linked to Eric's maintenance routes. 2 days later, in a locked storage unit rented under his name, they found Lauren. She had been killed shortly after disappearing. Evidence showed she had been lured into conversation in the hallway by someone she trusted. Someone in uniform. Someone with authority. When confronted, Eric initially denied everything. Then he blamed stress, loneliness, curiosity. He claimed he never meant for it to go that far, but the evidence told a clear story. Digital logs, access records, recovered footage, fibers, all tied him to the crime. Prosecutors argued he had used his position to monitor residents, learn their schedules, and create opportunities. At trial, former tenants testified about feeling watched, about uncomfortable encounters brushed off as harmless at the time. The jury deliberated less than 4 hours. Eric Dalton was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Afterward, the city ordered inspections of every residential security system tied to private access controls. Laws were updated. Oversight tightened. At Westbridge Apartments, new cameras were installed, this time monitored by an independent service. But residents say something still feels different, because once you learn that the cameras meant to protect you can be turned against you, you never look at a dark hallway the same way again. At exactly 12:03 a.m., the last message appeared on Jordan Miller's phone. "I'm H. Ome. Talk tomorrow." It was sent to his best friend, casual and ordinary. The kind of message no one would ever think twice about. By morning, Jordan was dead. The 28-year-old software technician lived alone in a quiet apartment complex on the edge of town. He was reliable, introverted, and routine-driven. He worked late, ordered takeout, and rarely went out. Nothing about his life suggested danger. That's what made his death so difficult to understand. When police arrived after a wellness check request from his employer, they found Jordan lying on the living room floor. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no struggle. The door had been locked from the inside. At first, investigators considered a medical emergency, but the autopsy told a different story. Jordan had been killed sometime after midnight, and someone else had been there. The timeline became the central mystery. Security cameras outside the building showed Jordan entering at 11:58 p.m. He looked normal, tired, scrolling on his phone. No one followed him in. No one entered after. Yet his phone activity showed another message sent at 12:21 a.m. One he never wrote. It simply read, "Everything's fine." That message had been sent from his device. Investigators dug deeper. They pulled Wi-Fi logs from the apartment router. Another device had connected briefly between 12:10 and 12:30 a.m., a device that wasn't Jordan's. The MAC address pointed to a phone registered to someone in the same building, a neighbor named Kyle Bennett. Kyle lived 2 doors down. He was quiet, friendly enough, known mostly for keeping to himself. He and Jordan had exchanged polite hellos but weren't friends. When questioned, Kyle said he had been asleep all night. He claimed he didn't even know Jordan's last name, but his phone told a different story. Location data placed him inside Jordan's apartment during the exact window of time investigators were focused on. When asked how that was possible, Kyle's answers became vague. He said his phone must have connected automatically. He said he didn't remember leaving his apartment. Detectives noticed something else, a faint scratch on his hand. Kyle claimed it came from his cat, but veterinary records showed his cat had died months earlier. A search warrant was issued. Inside Kyle's apartment, police found a spare key to Jordan's unit hidden inside a drawer. It had been copied recently. They also found a notebook filled with observations, times Jordan came home, what he wore when his lights went off. The final page read, "After midnight no one notices." Confronted with the evidence, Kyle finally spoke. He admitted he had been watching Jordan for weeks. He said he was lonely, curious, obsessed. He claimed he only wanted to talk, to understand him. He said he used the copied key to enter quietly after midnight. According to his statement, Jordan woke up and panicked. An argument followed. Things escalated. The message sent at 12:21 a.m. was an attempt to delay discovery. The prosecution dismantled his story piece by piece. Digital footprints, key copy records, router logs, surveillance. Everything pointed to premeditation. At trial, Jordan's family sat silently as messages were read aloud. His final normal texts, his unfinished work drafts, his unsent plans. Kyle Bennett was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Afterward, the apartment complex changed its security policies. Locks were replaced, key access was restricted. Tenants were warned to report anything unusual. But for those who lived there, the damage lingered, because the most unsettling part wasn't the violence. It was the realization that danger didn't arrive loudly or forcefully. It came quietly, after midnight, when no one was watching. No one could explain the gap between 9:42 p.m. and 1:18 a.m. 4 hours of time simply vanished from Olivia Park's life, and no one could say where she had been. Olivia was 25, a graduate student known for her strict routines. She tracked everything: meals, workouts, sleep schedules. Her phone calendar was color-coded. Her smartwatch logged every step. That night, her data went silent. Earlier in the evening, Olivia had attended a study group at the university library. Security cameras showed her leaving at 9:38 p.m., waving goodbye to a friend. She walked toward the parking garage, headphones in, backpack over her shoulder. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it became the beginning. When Olivia didn't show up for class the next morning, her roommate grew concerned. Calls went unanswered, messages unread. By afternoon, campus police were notified. Her car was still parked in the garage, unlocked. Her backpack lay on the back seat. Her phone, however, was missing. Campus police reviewed footage. Cameras showed Olivia entering the garage, then nothing. One of the cameras covering the central stairwell had stopped recording for nearly 4 hours. A system outage, administrators said. But investigators weren't convinced. They pulled data from Olivia's smartwatch. The last recorded movement was at 9:42 p.m. Her heart rate spiked suddenly, then disappeared from the system altogether. 4 hours later, at 1:18 a.m., her heart rate reappeared briefly, weak, irregular, then stopped. Search teams were deployed immediately. Students, volunteers, and officers searched nearby buildings, wooded areas, drainage tunnels, and maintenance corridors. Flyers spread across campus and social media. 2 days later, a groundskeeper made a discovery near an old utility access road behind the science complex. Olivia was found there. The medical examiner confirmed she had died during the early morning hours. There were no obvious signs of a prolonged struggle, no clear weapon, no forced trauma that explained everything. The cause of death was ruled homicide. Attention returned to the missing hours. Investigators combed through access logs across campus. One ID card stood out. A temporary maintenance badge used shortly before the camera outage. It belonged to a contractor named Ethan Rowe. Rowe had been hired part-time to service electrical panels. He was quiet, kept odd hours, and often worked alone. He had access to restricted areas and camera systems. When questioned, he said he had been repairing a faulty panel that night. He claimed he never saw Olivia, but his timeline didn't hold. Electronic logs showed his badge had been used in 3 separate buildings within minutes, physically impossible without assistance or manipulation. Further investigation revealed something more disturbing. Rowe had searched Olivia's name online weeks before her disappearance. He had accessed her public university profile repeatedly. He had even saved a photo of her schedule posted on a student forum. In his vehicle, police found a burner phone. Location data from the phone placed him near the utility road at 1:12 a.m. When confronted with the evidence, Rowe's calm began to crack. He admitted he had noticed Olivia around campus. He said he just wanted to talk. He claimed things got confusing. He could not explain why her phone was later found smashed near a drainage ditch. Digital forensics revealed more. During the 4-hour blackout, someone had manually overridden the camera system. Logs showed intentional disabling, not a malfunction. Rowe had the access. Prosecutors argued that the missing hours were not an accident. They were engineered. A window of darkness created deliberately. At trial, the timeline became the Sen. Terpiece, minute by minute, swipe by swipe, signal by signal. The jury listened as experts reconstructed the lost hours. How Olivia had been intercepted, how systems had been disabled, how movements were hidden. Rowe was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, the university changed its security policies. Temporary access badges were eliminated, camera systems were hardened, emergency alerts were expanded. But students still talk about the missing hours, the time no camera saw, the time no one could account for, the time that proved silence, even digital silence, can hide the truth. The dispatcher would later say she remembered the voice immediately, not the words, the tone, calm, too calm. At 3:26 a.m., a 911 call came in from a quiet residential block in Northwood. The caller spoke slowly, carefully choosing each word. "I think something's wrong," the voice said. "My wife isn't responding." The caller identified himself as Daniel Price. Officers were dispatched within minutes. When they arrived, the front door was unlocked. The house was dark except for a lamp glowing in the living room. Upstairs, they found 32-year-old Megan Price lying on the bedroom floor. She was unresponsive. Paramedics pronounced her dead at the scene. There were no obvious signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No overturned furniture. The house looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Daniel stood in the hallway, wrapped in a blanket, speaking softly, answering questions politely. He said he had woken up and found his wife on the floor. He said he panicked. He said he didn't know what had happened. But the 911 recording lingered in investigators' minds. Because while Daniel claimed he was frightened, his voice never shook. The medical examiner's findings deepened the concern. Megan had not died naturally. There were signs of suffocation, subtle, easy to miss. No dramatic injuries, just enough evidence to show someone had restricted her breathing. The estimated time of death placed it nearly an hour before Daniel called 911. That gap mattered. Detectives replayed the emergency call repeatedly. In one section, nearly inaudible beneath Daniel's voice, a faint sound could be heard. Breathing. Not his, someone else's. Audio technicians isolated the track, enhanced it. The sound wasn't coming from the background. It was coming from the phone itself, from inside the house. Investigators asked Daniel about it. He said he hadn't noticed anything, said it must have been interference. But the audio analysis told a different story. The breathing pattern matched someone nearby, close to the phone, slow, controlled, intentional. As if someone was listening while the call was being made, police began to suspect that the 911 call wasn't a plea for help. It was a performance. They started pulling digital records. Daniel's phone showed deleted searches made days earlier. How long does it take to suffocate someone? Can 911 calls be traced immediately? Do calm voices sound guilty? He claimed someone else must have used his phone, but the timestamps placed the searches late at night, while he was home. Neighbors were interviewed next. One neighbor reported hearing raised voices earlier that evening. Another remembered a sudden silence around 2:30 a.m. One said they heard footsteps pacing shortly afterward. Then came the detail that broke the case open. The couple owned a smart speaker in the bedroom. Its voice activation history revealed something chilling. At 2:41 a.m. it had been triggered by a command, "Stop recording." At 2:43 a.m. another command, "Delete history." Both were spoken in Daniel's voice. Megan's voice never appeared in the logs after 2:12 a.m. Investigators concluded she had already been unconscious by th. And when confronted with the audio evidence, Daniel stopped denying. He didn't confess outright. Instead, he said, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." That was enough. At trial, prosecutors played the 911 call for the jury. The courtroom went silent as the enhanced audio revealed the faint breathing beneath Daniel's calm words. The jury listened again and again. They heard calculation where fear should have been. They heard control. They heard someone buying time. Daniel Price was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The 911 recording is now used in dispatcher training, not as an example of panic but as a warning. Because sometimes, the most frightening calls aren't the ones filled with screaming, they're the ones that sound too calm, too careful, too practiced. And they hide the truth in the quiet spaces between words. The screaming started just after 10:30 p.m. It echoed through the courtyard of the Riverview Apartments. Sharp, panicked, unmistakably human. Several residents later said the same thing. It made them freeze. Some looked out their windows. Others turned up their TVs. A few stood in their hallways, listening. But no one called the police, not right away. Because the screaming stopped, and silence, somehow, felt easier to live with. The woman screaming was 31-year-old Talia Monroe. She had moved into the complex only 3 months earlier, a nursing assistant, quiet, friendly, the kind of neighbor who smiled but didn't linger. She lived alone in a ground-floor unit near the courtyard. That night, she had just returned from work. Security footage showed her entering the building at 10:18 p.m., rubbing her eyes, clearly exhausted. She unlocked her door and went inside. At 10:31 p.m., multiple residents later admitted hearing shouting, a woman yelling "stop," a loud crash, then screaming. One resident peeked through our blinds but saw nothing. Another assumed it was a couple arguing. Someone else said they didn't want to get involved. At 10:34 p.m., the noise stopped. At 7:12 a.m. the next morning, a neighbor noticed Talia's door slightly open. Inside, she was found dead. There were signs of a struggle, furniture overturned, a lamp shattered. Her phone lay on the floor, cracked. The medical examiner later ruled her death a homicide. Police canvassed the building immediately. That's when the uncomfortable truth emerged. At least 9 people had heard something. 7 admitted they assumed it was domestic drama. 2 said they thought someone else would call. 1 said, "I didn't want to be wrong." No one had called 911. Detectives reviewed security footage from the courtyard. At 10:29 p.m., a man entered the building behind Talia. He wore a hoodie and kept his head down. The camera caught only his shoes clearly, distinctive white soles with a cracked heel. He exited at 10:36 p.m., walking quickly. Investigators tracked the shoes. They belonged to a man named Aaron Cole, who lived 2 buildings over. He had prior complaints filed against him for aggressive behavior, though nothing that led to charges. When questioned, Aaron said he had been home all night, but his phone data placed him inside Talia's building at the exact time of the screams. A search warrant uncovered more. In his apartment, police found a hoodie matching the footage. His shoes had a cracked sole identical to the print seen on camera. More disturbingly, they found online searches from days earlier. Apartment layouts, Riverview. How to avoid cameras. What happens if neighbors don't call police? The evidence painted a grim picture. Investigators determined Aaron had followed Talia into the building. What began as an encounter turned violent. When she screamed, he panicked, but no one intervened. The silence around her became part of the crime. At trial, prosecutors played audio clips recorded unintentionally by a nearby security camera microphone. The screams were muffled but unmistakable. Several jurors cried. Residents who had heard the sounds were called as witnesses. Many broke down on the stand, haunted by guilt. "I thought someone else would help," one said through tears. Aaron Cole was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Afterward, the city passed new ordinances requiring residential complexes to display emergency contact signage and install panic alert systems. Community programs were launched teaching residents when, and how, to call for help, but for those who lived at Riverview that night, the lesson came too late. A memorial plaque now sits near the courtyard. If you hear someone in danger, call. Silence can be deadly. And every time someone hears a raised voice echo through the building, they remember the night everyone heard screaming. And no one helped. Everyone said Marcus Hill was lucky to have a friend like Leo Carter. They said it with admiration, sometimes even envy. Leo had been there since childhood, same elementary school, same basketball team, same neighborhood. When Marcus's parents divorced, Leo's family let him stay over whenever things got tense. When Marcus struggled in college, Leo helped him find work. Ride or die, Leo liked to say. And for years it seemed true. Marcus was 29 when he finally moved into his own apartment across town. It was a small step toward independence, but one he was proud of. He started dating, made new friends, and slowly built a life that didn't revolve around his childhood past. Leo didn't like that. At first, it showed up as jokes. "You forget about me now that you've got new people. Guess I'm not important anymore." Marcus laughed it off. Then the messages started coming more often. Calls late at night. Questions about where he was, who he was with. Comments that sounded caring but felt heavy. "You should be careful. People take advantage of you. I just want to protect you." Friends noticed how often Leo showed up unannounced. How he always seemed to know Marcus's plans before anyone else did. How he lingered too long. Marcus tried setting boundaries. He stopped answering every call. He canceled plans. He told Leo he needed space. That's when things changed. On a Friday night, Marcus went out with coworkers to celebrate a promotion. He texted Leo earlier, saying he'd be busy. Leo replied with a thumbs-up emoji. At 11:47 p.m., Marcus sent one last message to a friend, heading home. Talk tomorrow. He never made it. The next morning, his car was found parked neatly outside his apartment. Keys inside. Phone missing. Police were called by his sister when he didn't show up for brunch. Inside the apartment, nothing appeared disturbed. No forced entry. No struggle. Just quiet. Too quiet. Detectives quickly noticed something odd. Marcus's door lock showed signs of being opened with a copied key. Only one person besides Marcus had ever been given a spare. Leo. When questioned, Leo said he hadn't used it in years. Claimed he had been home all night. Said he was worried when he heard Marcus hadn't answered messages. Police pulled his phone data. It placed him near Marcus's building shortly after midnight. When confronted, Leo said he had gone for a walk to clear his head. But surveillance cameras showed him entering the building at 12:06 a.m. and leaving at 12:41 a.m. He never appeared on camera carrying anything. That detail haunted investigators. A search warrant followed. Inside Leo's apartment, detectives found something unsettling, a box labeled Memories. Inside were photos of Marcus, many taken without his knowledge, screenshots of messages, notes describing his routines. One note read, "He doesn't need anyone else." Another read, "If I can't have him close, no one can." The case escalated quickly. Search teams expanded to nearby construction sites and wooded areas. 2 days later, they found Marcus in a shallow ravine not far from the apartment complex. The medical examiner ruled his death a homicide. Evidence showed he had been restrained. There were no signs of robbery. Nothing was missing except his phone. Digital forensics later revealed that Leo had tried to access Marcus's accounts after his disappearance. During interrogation, Leo broke down. He said he felt abandoned, replaced, forgotten. He said he only wanted to talk, to fix things. He claimed everything went wrong when Marcus tried to leave. Prosecutors called it obsession masquerading as loyalty. At trial, friends testified about Leo's possessive behavior. Text messages were read aloud. Ones that sounded loving at first, then controlling, then frightening. The jury deliberated less than 5 hours. Leo Carter was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. Afterward, Marcus's family started a foundation focused on recognizing warning signs of coercive friendships, relationships that look supportive but slowly turn controlling, because not all danger comes from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the person who says they'll never leave your side, and means it too literally. For nearly 5 years, the case had gone nowhere. Emily Carter vanished on a rainy October night, just days after her 21st birthday. She left her apartment to meet someone she trusted, or so everyone believed. Her phone last pinged near the old highway bridge outside town. After that, nothing. No witnesses, no body, no arrest. The case slowly slipped into that quiet category police hate the most. Unsolved. Her parents never stopped pushy. They attended every town meeting, every fundraiser, every anniversary vigil. They taped Emily's photo to lampposts even after the ink began to fade. And then, one night, everything changed. It started with a drunk driving arrest. At 2:14 a.m., officers pulled over a man swerving across the center line on a rural road. His name was Trevor Miles, a local contractor known for his temper and his heavy drinking. In the back seat of his truck, police noticed something odd: a sealed plastic container filled with dirt. When asked about it, Trevor laughed and said it was nothing important. At the station, his blood alcohol level came back well over the limit. While processing him, officers searched his vehicle more thoroughly. Inside the glove compartment, they found an old flip phone. It wasn't registered to him. It was registered to Emily Carter. The phone had been reported missing the night she disappeared. Detectives were notified immediately. When questioned, Trevor claimed he had found it years ago near the bridge and kept it out of curiosity. But when investigators powered it on, they discovered something chilling. The phone still held unsent drafts, messages typed but never sent. One read, "Trevor, please stop. I told you I don't want this." Another, "You're scaring me. I'm going home." The timestamps matched the night Emily vanished. Suddenly, a name that had floated on the edges of the investigation snapped into focus. Trevor Miles had known Emily. They'd worked briefly at the same bar. Co-workers later recalled that he often lingered around her, offering rides, drinks, favors she politely declined. He had a reputation for being too intense, but nothing that had ever led to charges. Detectives reopened the case in full. Phone records showed Trevor had called Emily repeatedly the night she disappeared. Location data placed his truck near the bridge during the same time frame as her last known signal. When confronted, he changed his story. Said they had met voluntarily, argued, then gone their separate ways. But forensic evidence told a different story. A search warrant was issued for his property. Behind his workshop, investigators found disturbed soil near a tree line. Cadaver dogs alerted almost immediately. Emily was there. The autopsy confirmed she had been killed the night she vanished. The town erupted in shock. For years, Trevor had lived openly among them, attending local events, joking at the bar, blending into daily life. Some people had even signed petitions demanding police do more to find Emily, never knowing the man standing beside them already knew the truth. At trial, prosecutors presented a simple timeline. Emily had trusted Trevor enough to meet him. When she rejected his advances, he lost control. He panicked, hid the evidence, and carried on with his life, until one mistake unraveled everything. The defense tried to argue intoxication, confusion, lack of intent. The jury didn't buy it. After 2 days of deliberation, Trevor Miles was convicted of murder. When the verdict was read, Emily's mother wept quietly, not in relief, but in exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked how it felt to finally have answers. She said only this: "The truth always waits. It doesn't disappear, it just waits for the night someone finally tells it." Today, a small plaque stands near the bridge where Emily was last seen. It reads, "Justice may take time, but silence never protects the truth." From the outside, the Lawson home looked warm and ordinary. Yellow porch light, wind chimes on the front steps, a swing that creaked gently in the evening breeze. Neighbors often described it as comfortable, the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. Inside lived 3 people: Mark Lawson, his wife Denise, her teenage daughter, Ava. To outsiders, they were a blended family still learning to fit together. Mark was quiet, dependable, worked long hours. Denise was friendly, active in community events. Ava was shy, artistic, and kept mostly to herself. No one imagined the house was built on lies. It started with a missing person report. Ava didn't come home from school one afternoon. At first, Denise assumed she was at a friend's house. But hours passed. Calls went unanswered, messages unread. By nightfall, police were notified. Searches began immediately. Friends were questioned. Teachers were interviewed. Ava had last been seen leaving campus at 3:18 p.m., walking toward her usual bus stop, but she never boarded. Security footage from a nearby gas station showed her walking alone, then stepping into a car that pulled up beside her. The driver's face wasn't clear. The car, however, was. It matched the make and model of Mark Lawson's vehicle. When confronted, Mark said he had been at work all afternoon. His employer confirmed he clocked out at 5:30 p.m. But surveillance showed something strange. His car left the parking lot at 3:05 and returned just before 5. When questioned again, Mark said he must have forgotten. Maybe he ran an errand. Denise grew quiet. Detectives noticed she seemed nervous, careful with her words. When interviewed alone, she admitted something troubling. Ava had recently been afraid of Mark. She said Ava had mentioned feeling watched in her own home, said she avoided being alone with him. Denise claimed she hadn't taken it seriously enough. That admission changed everything. Police searched the house. At first, nothing stood out. Everything looked clean, too clean. The basement, however, told a different story. Behind a storage shelf, investigators found scuff marks on the floor. Beneath a rug, faint stains that reacted to forensic testing. They also found a locked toolbox. Inside were Ava's phone, her bracelet, and a notebook filled with drawings. One page had writing scribbled in the corner. "If anything happens to me, it's him." The words shook everyone who read them. Mark was arrested that night. During interrogation, he denied harming Ava. He claimed she had run away. He accused her of lying. He said she was troubled. But his story fell apart quickly. Phone records showed his phone traveling the same route as the car in the footage. GPS data placed him near a remote wooded area outside town that evening. Search teams were sent there. 2 days later, they found Ava. The truth came out slowly, painfully. Prosecutors revealed a pattern of manipulation, secrecy, and control inside the house. Things hidden behind smiles and polite conversation. Evidence showed Mark had isolated Ava, monitored her movements, and silenced her when she tried to speak out. The courtroom was silent as details were presented. Denise testified through tears, haunted by what she hadn't seen, or hadn't wanted to see. Mark Lawson was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the trial, the house was sold. The new owners painted it white, replaced the windows, and removed the swing. But those who lived nearby said the place never felt the same. Because sometimes the most dangerous homes aren't abandoned or broken. They're neat, they're quiet, and they're full of lies. No one noticed the time at first. That was the strange part. When Claire Donovan failed to show up for work on a Monday morning, her manager assumed she'd overslept. She was rarely late, but everyone slipped sometimes. By noon, concern replaced patience. By evening, police were called. Claire was 32, organized to a fault, and known for keeping detailed planners. Her friends joked that she tracked her life in 15-minute blocks. So when investigators opened her apartment and found her planner open on the kitchen table, they knew something was wrong. The last entry was written neatly in blue ink. 8:30 p.m. Home, nothing after that. Security cameras in her building showed Claire entering at 8:27 p.m., carrying groceries. She waved at the concierge and walked toward the elevator. She looked relaxed. Normal. Then the timeline broke. Her phone activity stopped at 8:41 p.m. No calls, no messages, no movement. But her smartwatch told a stranger story. Between 8:42 p.m. and 12:09 a.m., there was activity. Steps recorded, heart rate spikes, movement across multiple floors of the building. Claire somehow had been moving. Just not in any way that made sense. Police reviewed hallway footage. Several cameras mysteriously failed between 8:40 and midnight. Others worked perfectly. Maintenance logs showed no reported outages. When footage resumed after midnight, the hallways were empty. Claire's apartment showed no signs of forced entry. Groceries were still on the counter, partially unpacked. Her purse was inside. Her keys were on the hook. Her phone was missing. The case quickly drew attention. Detectives interviewed neighbors. One resident mentioned hearing footsteps late at night, slow, deliberate pacing. Another remembered seeing a man in a building-issued jacket near the stairwell. That detail mattered. The building employed only one overnight staff member, a security supervisor named Alan Brooks. Alan had worked there for nearly a decade. Trusted, quiet, reliable. He had access to every floor, every camera panel, every service corridor. When questioned, he said he'd been doing routine rounds. He denied seeing Claire, but electronic logs told a different story. His keycard had been used repeatedly on Claire's floor during the missing hours. More than necessary. More than routine. Investigators also discovered that camera outages occurred only in areas his access code controlled. A search warrant followed. In Alan's apartment, police found a second phone hidden inside a drawer. It contained deleted messages referencing watching schedules and quiet times. One message, saved as a draft, read, "She always comes home alone." That single sentence changed the direction of the case. Digital forensics revealed the phone had connected to the same Wi-Fi network as Claire's apartment during the missing hours. GPS data placed Alan moving between service corridors and stairwells. When confronted, he initially denied everything, then he asked for a lawyer. Search teams expanded to storage areas beneath the building, long unused maintenance tunnels sealed years earlier. There, behind a locked utility door, they found Claire. The medical examiner later confirmed she had died during the early hours of the morning. The missing hours were no longer a mystery. They were a window, one deliberately created. At trial, prosecutors laid out a timeline constructed from access logs, wearable data, and digital traces. Each piece filled another minute of the gap. They argued that Alan used his position to isolate, control, and conceal, relying on the building's systems to erase evidence. The jury deliberated less than a day. Alan Brooks was convicted of murder and sentenced to life in prison. After the verdict, the building underwent major changes. Security was outsourced. Access systems were replaced. Residents were notified of new safety procedures. But for those who lived there before, the damage lingered, because they learned something unsettling. Sometimes the most dangerous moments aren't the ones you see on camera. They're the hours no one can explain. The file was thin. Too thin for a murder. When Detective Rosa Alvarez first opened the cold case box, she noticed how little was inside. A few photographs, a short incident report, and a faded missing person flyer. That was all that remained of Daniel Reyes, who disappeared 20 years earlier. No body, no suspects, no arrests. Just a note written in red pen across the folder, "Case inactive, lack of evidence." Daniel had been 19 when he vanished. A college freshman, part-time grocery clerk, and the oldest son in a close-knit family. On the night he disappeared, he had called his mother and said he was walking home from a friend's house. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he told her. He never arrived. At the time, police assumed he had run away. There were rumors of drugs, of bad influences, of teenage rebellion. His parents insisted those rumors were false, but their voices carried little weight. The case quietly died until 2 decades later, when a highway expansion project uncovered something buried beneath an abandoned drainage culvert. Human remains. The location was less than half a mile from where Daniel had last been seen. Forensic testing confirmed what his family had feared for 20 years. It was him. The discovery reopened wounds, and reopened the investigation. Detective Alvarez began by reviewing old witness statements. One name appeared again and again: Raymond Holt. Back in 2003, Raymond had been a local mechanic in his late 20s. He'd been one of the last people to see Daniel alive. According to his statement, Daniel had stopped by his garage asking for directions. Raymond claimed he helped and never saw him again. At the time, police accepted the story. But now, with fresh eyes, Alvarez saw something odd. Raymond's statement had been edited. Large portions were crossed out. Timelines didn't match. And one line stood out. Subject appeared nervous. Argument overheard. That line had never been followed up. Alvarez tracked Raymond down. He was still living in town, older now, grayer, quieter. He worked odd jobs and avoided attention. When she interviewed him, his hands shook. He said he barely remembered Daniel, but when she mentioned the drainage culvert, his breathing changed. "Why would you look there?" he asked. That question changed everything. Police obtained a search warrant for Raymond S. property. Behind his garage, buried beneath old scrap metal, they found a rusted toolbox. Inside were items that had belonged to Daniel: a watch, a keychain, a cracked phone case. The case cracked wide open. Confronted with the evidence, Raymond finally talked. He admitted that on the night Daniel disappeared, the two had argued. Daniel had accused him of stealing money from a mutual acquaintance. Voices were raised. Tempers flared. Raymond said he shoved him. Daniel fell. hit his head on the concrete edge of the culvert. He didn't get up. Panicked, Raymond hid the body, convinced no one would ever find it. And for 20 years, no one did, until progress literally dug up the past. At trial, prosecutors laid out how small-town bias and assumptions had allowed the case to go cold, how a young man's disappearance had been dismissed because it was easier to believe he ran away than to investigate deeply. Witnesses testified about missed leads, about ignored tips, about a family that never stopped asking questions. Daniel's mother, now elderly, took the stand. "I knew he didn't leave," she said quietly. "A mother knows." The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. Raymond Holt was convicted of manslaughter and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Outside the courthouse, Daniel's family held a photograph taken just weeks before he vanished. He was smiling, unaware of how long justice would take. 20 years. But it came. A small plaque now stands near the culvert, placed by his family. It reads, "Truth doesn't expire. Justice may wait, but it remembers." Everyone remembered Olivia Hart for her smile. It was warm, effortless, the kind that made people feel instantly at ease. She worked the front desk at a local fitness center, greeting members by name, laughing easily, always asking how their day was going. People said she had a gift, the ability to make strangers feel like friends. That's why no one suspected her when the first woman disappeared. The missing woman, Kara Wells, was a regular at the gym. She stopped showing up one week without explanation. Friends assumed she'd changed schedules. Her phone went unanswered, but no alarm was raised right away. Then another woman vanished. Then another. All had one thing in common: they had been last seen near the gym. Police initially treated the cases separately. Adults were allowed to disappear. There was no sign of violence, no witnesses, no evidence tying the cases together, until a detective noticed a pattern. Each woman had recently spoken with Olivia. Security footage showed her chatting with them at the front desk, laughing, smiling, writing notes on sticky pads, sometimes stepping outside with them for a moment. The footage looked harmless, friendly, casual. Nothing that screamed danger, but detectives watched closely. They noticed Olivia often offered help, rides, advice, connections. She positioned herself as someone trustworthy, someone safe. A background check revealed nothing alarming, no criminal record, no complaints. She had lived in the city for years. But when investigators pulled her phone records, they found something disturbing. She had exchanged messages with each missing woman shortly before they vanished. Friendly at first, encouraging, then increasingly personal. One message read, "You don't have to do this alone. I know a place where you can start over." Another said, "I can help you disappear if that's what you want." Police began surveillance. One evening, they watched Olivia leave the gym with a young woman who had recently joined. They got into Olivia's car and drove out of town. Officers followed at a distance. The car turned onto a remote gravel road leading to an abandoned farmhouse. When the vehicle stopped, officers moved in. Inside the house, they found evidence no one expected. Several small rooms had been converted into makeshift living spaces: mattresses, clothes, personal belongings, phones, IDs, all belonging to women who had been reported missing. But they weren't dead. They were alive, confused, isolated, afraid. They told police Olivia had convinced them they needed to disappear, that their lives were unsafe, that people were watching them, that only she could protect them. She offered shelter, secrecy, and control. Over time, she isolated them completely, took their phones, limited contact, controlled food and schedules, told them the outside world was dangerous, a cult of one. When confronted, Olivia didn't resist. She smiled. She told detectives she was saving them. She said they trusted her, that they were happier with her, that she had never hurt anyone. But evidence showed psychological manipulation, coercion, and unlawful imprisonment. The women had been missing for months, some for over a year. At trial, prosecutors described Olivia as a master manipulator who weaponized kindness. They showed messages where she slowly broke down boundaries, created dependence, and isolated her victims. Experts testified about coercive control, how emotional captivity can be as powerful as physical restraint. The courtroom watched as survivor after survivor took the stand, shaking but resolute. They described the smile that made them feel safe, the voice that told them to trust her, the moment they realized they couldn't leave. Olivia Hart was convicted on multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and coercive control. She was sentenced to decades in prison. The gym closed shortly after. The front desk where she once stood smiling now sits empty. And in the town where people once said, "She's so nice," a new lesson lingers. Sometimes the most dangerous people don't look angry. They don't look cruel. They look kind. And that's how they get close enough to trap you.